A letter from 1943 that still smelled like him. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, 78 years after it was written. Eleanor Whitman found it wedged behind a loose floorboard in the attic of her grandmother's Victorian house in Portland, Oregon, the house she'd inherited, along with decades of memories she'd never fully understood. Support the channel by subscribing. It means the world to us. The envelope was yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. Miss Catherine Louise Harper, 1247 Elm Street, Portland, Oregon. But it was the scent that stopped Eleanor's breath, faint but unmistakable, like cedar and something distinctly masculine that seemed to whisper of another time. Her grandmother had been Catherine Harper once, before she became Catherine Whitman, before she married Eleanor's grandfather in 1946. Eleanor had never heard her mention anyone else, any other love, any other life before the quiet, steady man who had raised Eleanor's father. With trembling fingers, Eleanor opened the letter that had waited nearly 8 decades to be read. My dearest Catherine, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back from the Pacific like I promised. I'm writing this before we ship out from San Francisco, and I need you to know that every word I ever spoke to you was true, especially the ones I whispered in the moonlight that last night we had together. Do you remember how we met? I was that awkward sergeant who spilled coffee all over your nursing uniform at the USO dance. You laughed instead of getting angry, and I knew right then that I was going to love you for the rest of my life, however long that might be. The letter was signed, Forever Yours, James. And as Eleanor read, she felt herself transported back to a world she'd only known through history books and faded photographs. Portland, Oregon, August 1942. Catherine Harper smoothed her white nursing uniform and checked her reflection in the mirror of the Red Cross station downtown. At 23, she had already seen more than her share of heartbreak. Young men shipping out, families saying goodbye, the constant underlying fear that gripped everyone during those uncertain days of 1942. The USO dance was being held in the grand ballroom of the Benson Hotel, and Catherine had volunteered to help serve refreshments to the soldiers who would be shipping out within the week. She wasn't looking for romance. She'd convinced herself that wartime was no time for matters of the heart. Love, she'd decided, was a luxury that would have to wait until the world made sense again. But then she collided with Sergeant James Mitchell. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee, navigating through the crowd of dancing couples when someone bumped into him from behind. The hot liquid splashed across Catherine's pristine uniform, and she felt the scalding heat against her skin. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," James exclaimed, his face turning crimson as he fumbled for his handkerchief. "I'm such a clumsy fool. Please let me—" Catherine looked up at him, really looked, and felt something shift inside her chest. He had kind brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and his dark hair was perfectly regulation cut. There was something genuine about his distress, something endearing about the way he was frantically trying to dab at the coffee stain. "It's all right," she said, surprising herself by laughing. "Really, it's fine. It'll wash out." "No, it's not fine. I've ruined your uniform, and you probably spent forever getting ready, and now—" "Sergeant," she interrupted gently, placing her hand on his arm. "I said it's all right. These things happen during wartime, don't they? Much worse things than coffee stains." James stopped his frantic apologies and looked at her with wonder. "You're not angry? Should I be?" "Most girls would be furious," Catherine smiled. "Well, I'm not most girls. I'm Catherine Harper. And you are?" "James Mitchell, Sergeant James Mitchell, 41st Infantry Division." He straightened unconsciously, as if reporting for duty. "Well, Sergeant Mitchell, would you like to dance? Carefully, of course. I'd hate to have to explain to my supervisor why my uniform is stained with both coffee and whatever they've been serving as punch." The band was playing "I'll Be Seeing You," and as James led her onto the dance floor, Catherine felt as if she was stepping into a different version of her life. His hand was warm against the small of her back, and despite his earlier clumsiness, he was a surprisingly good dancer. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked as he guided her through a gentle turn. "My mother insisted on lessons when I was 12, said it would make me a gentleman." His cheeks flushed slightly. "I hated it then. And now?" "Now I'm grateful for every step." His eyes met hers. "Very grateful." They danced through 3 more songs, talking in the spaces between the music. James was from a small town in Washington, had been working as a teacher before the war called him to service. He spoke about his students with the same warmth that Catherine felt when she talked about her patients at the hospital. "You're a nurse?" he asked, as they swayed to White Christmas. "At Good Samaritan Hospital. I work with the wounded soldiers who come back." Her voice grew softer. "The ones who make it back." James nodded, understanding passing between them. They both knew the reality of war, the statistics that hung unspoken in the air of every USO dance, every goodbye at train stations. "When do you ship out?" Catherine asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Friday. We're heading to California first, then, well, somewhere in the Pacific. They don't tell us much." 2 days, they had 2 days. "Would you like to see Portland?" Catherine asked impulsively. "I have tomorrow off. And there are some beautiful places, if you'd like, that is." James's smile was like sunrise. "I'd like that very much." They met the next morning at Pioneer Courthouse Square. Catherine wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and James appeared in his dress uniform, looking polished and handsome and heartbreakingly young. Portland in August was at its most beautiful, and Catherine took James to all her favorite places. They rode the streetcar to Washington Park and walked among the rose gardens, where the late summer blooms filled the air with their perfume. They climbed to the top of Mount Tabor and looked out over the city, the Willamette River winding through it like a silver ribbon. "It's beautiful," James said, but he was looking at Catherine, not the view. "It is," she agreed, suddenly shy under his gaze. They had lunch at a small cafe downtown, sharing a piece of apple pie because sugar was rationed, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. James told her about his hometown, about the one-room schoolhouse where he'd taught children ranging from 6 to 16. "I miss it," he said. "Teaching, I mean. There's something hopeful about it, you know? You're giving children the tools to build whatever world comes after all this." Catherine understood. "That's how I feel about nursing. Each patient who gets better, who goes home to their family, it's like we're saving the future one person at a time." They spent the afternoon at Powell's Books, wandering through the stacks, sharing titles they loved. James bought Catherine a copy of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, inscribing it simply, "For Catherine, who made one afternoon feel like forever." James's evening approached. They found themselves walking along the waterfront, the setting sun painting the river gold. The reality of tomorrow, of James's departure, hung between them like a physical thing. "Catherine," James said, stopping suddenly, "I know we've only known each other for a day, but I have to tell you something." She turned to face him, her heart pounding. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "I know it's crazy. I know the timing is impossible. But I needed you to know. Before I leave, I needed you to know that meeting you has been the best thing to happen to me since this whole war started." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "James, you don't have to say anything," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know." But Catherine stepped closer, reaching up to touch his cheek. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "And you're right, it is crazy. But maybe crazy is exactly what we need right now." James kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, as the sun set over the Willamette River, and the world held its breath around them. That night, Catherine lay awake in her small apartment, replaying every moment of the day. She could still feel the warmth of James's hand in hers, could still taste the sweetness of his kiss. Tomorrow he would be gone, swallowed up by a war that seemed to devour everything good and gentle in the world. But tonight, she allowed herself to dream. James, meanwhile, sat in his barracks, writing the first of what would become dozens of letters. His bunkmates were all doing the same, writing to sweethearts, wives, mothers, anyone who represented home and hope and a reason to survive whatever was coming. "Dear Catherine," he wrote, "I can't sleep. All I can think about is today, about you, about the way you laughed when I nearly tripped over that root in the rose garden. I keep thinking that one day can't possibly be enough to build a love story on, but then I remember the way you looked at me when I told you I was falling in love with you, and I know that some things don't need time to be true. I'm going to write to you every day if you'll let me. I'm going to tell you about where I am and what I'm doing, as much as the censors will allow, and I'm going to count the days until I can come back to Portland, back to you. I know I don't have the right to ask you to wait for me, We barely know each other, and this war could last years, but I'm going to ask anyway, because I'm selfish and because I can't imagine a future that doesn't have you in it. Will you wait for me, Catherine? Will you write to me and tell me about the roses in Washington Park and the patients you're helping, and all the small, beautiful things that make up a life? Will you help me remember what I'm fighting for? All my love, James. The letters came regularly for the first year. Catherine would rush home from her shifts at the hospital, her heart racing whenever she saw James's familiar handwriting among her mail. She kept every letter in a wooden box that had belonged to her mother, reading and rereading them until she knew them by heart. James wrote about basic training in California, about the long voyage across the Pacific, about the heat and humidity of the islands where his unit was stationed. He couldn't say exactly where he was, but Catherine learned to read between the lines, to piece together clues from his descriptions of tropical birds and sudden rainstorms. He wrote about his fellow soldiers, Bobby from Kentucky, who could play any song on his harmonica, Martinez from New Mexico, who received care packages filled with his grandmother's tamales, Thompson from Maine, who had 5 sisters and spoke about them with such love that it made all the other men homesick. But mostly he wrote about missing her. I dream about that afternoon in the rose garden, he wrote in November. I dream about dancing with you at the USO, about the way you smiled when I told you I was falling in love with you. I carry that smile with me everywhere, Catherine. It's like carrying a piece of sunshine in my pocket. Catherine wrote back faithfully, sharing the details of her life in Portland. She told him about her patients, carefully observing the rules about sensitive information, but sharing the human stories, the young soldier who learned to walk again, the pilot who was so grateful to be alive that he cried every day for a week. She wrote about the changes in the city, how all the young men had disappeared, how women were working in the shipyards and factories, how everyone was growing victory gardens and saving tin cans for the war effort. I started volunteering at the USO dances again, she wrote in December. But I don't dance anymore. I just serve coffee and cake to the boys who are shipping out. And I think about you. I think about how scared they must be, how brave they're trying to be. And I pray for them the way I pray for you every night. The roses are dormant now, but I walked through the garden yesterday anyway. I sat on the bench where we shared that apple pie, and I tried to imagine you there with me. Spring will come again, James. The roses will bloom again, and I'll be waiting. For Christmas, Catherine sent James a package containing hand-knitted socks, a tin of cookies she'd made with her carefully hoarded sugar ration, and a photograph of herself standing in front of the rose garden. On the back she'd written, "Until you come home." James's Christmas letter arrived in February, delayed by military mail and the chaos of war. "Your photograph is pinned up above my bunk," he wrote. "The other fellows are all jealous. They say I'm the luckiest man in the Pacific Theater, and they're right. The cookies were long gone by the time this letter reached you, shared with the whole squad and declared the best thing we'd tasted since leaving the States. But it's your photograph I treasure most. You look so beautiful, so full of life and hope. You remind me that there's still beauty in the world, still something worth fighting for. I have something to tell you, Catherine, something I've been putting off because I wasn't sure how to say it. We're moving deeper into the campaign. I can't say where or when, but things are going to be more dangerous from here on out. My letters might become less frequent or might stop altogether for periods of time. But I need you to know that if anything happens to me, if I don't make it back, you were the best thing that ever happened to me. One afternoon with you was worth more than years of ordinary life. I love you, Catherine Harper. I love you with everything I am and everything I hope to be. When this war is over, I'm going to come back to Portland, and I'm going to ask you to marry me. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret waiting for me. Forever yours, James. The letters stopped coming in March 1943. At first, Catherine told herself it was just the military mail system, notorious for its delays and lost packages. She continued writing to James, her letters growing more desperate as the weeks turned into months. "I haven't heard from you in 6 weeks," she wrote in April. "I know you warned me that the letters might stop, but I'm scared, James. I'm so scared. Please, if you get this, just send me something, anything, to let me know you're alive." By May, Catherine had contacted the Red Cross, hoping they could provide information about James's unit. The response was frustratingly vague. Casualties were high in the Pacific Theater. Communications were often disrupted. Records were incomplete. Catherine threw herself into her work, taking extra shifts at the hospital, volunteering every free moment she had. If she stayed busy enough, she could almost forget the gnawing fear that had taken up permanent residence in her chest. The official telegram arrived on a Thursday in June. The War Department regrets to inform you that Sergeant James Mitchell has been reported missing in action in the Pacific Theater. Further information will be provided as it becomes available. Missing in action. Not killed. Missing. Catherine clung to that distinction like a lifeline. Missing meant there was still hope. Missing meant he might still come home. She waited through the summer of 1943, through the autumn, through another Christmas without word. The other nurses at the hospital watched her with pity and concern, but Catherine couldn't give up hope. She'd promised to wait, and she would wait. But as 1944 dawned, Catherine began to accept what her heart had known for months. James was gone. Whether officially declared dead or simply lost in the vast chaos of war, he wasn't coming back to Portland. He wasn't coming back to her. In February 1944, Catherine met Robert Whitman at a memorial service for local soldiers. He was a decent man, a widower whose wife had died of tuberculosis before the war. He was kind and steady and offered Catherine the sort of quiet, uncomplicated love that seemed appropriate for a world that had seen too much drama and heartbreak. When Robert proposed in the spring of 1945, as the war in Europe was ending, Catherine said yes. Not because she loved him the way she had loved James, but because she was tired of waiting for ghosts, tired of living in the past. They married in a simple ceremony that September as the war finally ended and the world began trying to heal itself. Catherine became Mrs. Robert Whitman, and she buried her memories of Sergeant James Mitchell as deeply as she could. She never spoke of James to her husband, never mentioned the box of letters hidden in her closet. When Robert suggested they move to a new house across town, Catherine agreed, packing away her past life like seasonal clothes she would never wear again. Catherine and Robert had a good marriage, not passionate, but comfortable and kind. They raised one son, David, who grew up never knowing that his mother had once loved someone else so deeply that it had nearly broken her heart. Years passed. Robert died of a heart attack in 1978, and Catherine remained in their house, surrounded by the life they had built together. She volunteered at the hospital until she was well into her 70s, tended her garden, played bridge with her friends. But sometimes, late at night, she would think about James Mitchell and wonder what had become of him. She would remember dancing with him at the USO, walking through the rose garden, the way he had kissed her as the sun set over the river. And sometimes she would wonder if he had tried to come back after all. If somewhere out there was a letter that had never reached her, words of love that had been lost in the chaos of war and time. Eleanor sat in her grandmother's attic, James's letter spread across her lap, tears streaming down her face. The mystery of her grandmother's quiet sadness, the sense that Catherine had always been waiting for something, finally made sense. But there was more in the manila envelope where she'd found the letter, official documents, telegrams, and at the bottom, another letter. This one was addressed to James Mitchell, stamped "Return to Sender," and dated December 1945. It was in Catherine's handwriting. "My dear James, I don't know if you're alive to read this, but I have to try one more time. I have to tell you that I waited, just like I promised. I waited for 2 years, through the telegram that said you were missing, through the silence that followed, but I can't wait anymore, James. I can't spend the rest of my life waiting for someone who might never come home. I'm going to marry Robert Whitman next month. He's a good man, and he'll give me the quiet life I need after all this uncertainty. I want you to know that if you do come back, if you're reading this, it doesn't mean I didn't love you. It doesn't mean our afternoon together didn't matter. It means that sometimes love isn't enough to overcome time and distance and the terrible things that happen during war. I will never forget you, James Mitchell. I will never forget the way you made me feel in those few precious hours we had together. You will always be my first love, my greatest what if, my most beautiful might have been. If there's a heaven, and if we both end up there someday, I hope we can have that dance you promised me. I hope we can have all the dances we missed." With all the love I have to give, Catherine Eleanor wiped her eyes and reached for her phone. Within minutes, she had found a genealogy website and begun searching for information about James Mitchell, 41st Infantry Division. What she found took her breath away. According to military records, Sergeant James Mitchell had been captured by Japanese forces in March 1943 and held as a prisoner of war until August 1945. He had survived the war, had been repatriated to the United States in September 1945, and had spent months in military hospitals recovering from his ordeal. The record showed that he had returned to his hometown in Washington, had eventually married a nurse he met during his recovery, and had lived until 1998, dying just 5 years before Catherine. Eleanor's hands shook as she continued reading. James had become a teacher again after the war, had raised 3 children, had lived what appeared to be a full and happy life. But in the obituary Eleanor found online, there was a small detail that made her heart ache. James Mitchell had been cremated, and his ashes had been scattered in the Rose Garden at Washington Park in Portland, Oregon, according to his final wishes. He had come back after all. He had found his way back to the place where he and Catherine had fallen in love, back to the roses and the memories of that perfect afternoon. Eleanor sat in the dusty attic, surrounded by the remnants of a love story that had spanned decades and survived war and separation and time itself. James had never stopped loving Catherine, just as Catherine had never stopped loving him. They had both lived other lives, had married other people, had found happiness in different ways. But some part of them had remained forever in that rose garden, forever on that dance floor, forever young and in love and full of hope. Eleanor carefully folded James's letter and placed it back in its envelope. The scent of cedar and something indefinably masculine still clung to the paper, fainter now but still there, still carrying the essence of a man who had loved her grandmother for one brief, shining moment that had somehow lasted a lifetime. Outside, the October sun was setting over Portland, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Eleanor thought about love and loss, about the choices people make and the chances they miss, about the way some stories end, not with reunion, but with understanding. She thought about her grandmother, who had carried this secret love for 60 years, who had lived a good life with a good man, but had never forgotten the soldier who had promised to come back to her. And she thought about James, who had kept his promise after all, who had found his way back to the roses where their love had bloomed for one perfect afternoon in 1942. Some love stories, Eleanor realized, don't end with happy endings. They end with something deeper, with the knowledge that love, once given truly and completely, never really dies. It transforms, it endures, it finds ways to bridge time and distance and even death itself. The letter from 1943 still smelled like him, still carried the essence of a love that had transcended everything the world could throw at it. And in that scent, in those faded words, in the roses that bloomed every spring in Washington Park, James and Catherine lived on. Forever young, forever in love, forever dancing to the music of Might Have Been. Eleanor smiled through her tears and whispered a prayer of gratitude for love stories that last lifetimes, even when the lovers can't.